I knew something was wrong the moment she handed me the box. Not because it was expensive. Not because it was unexpected. But because she hesitated. People don't hesitate when they give you something meaningless. It was my 56th birthday, and I was sitting at the end of the dining table like I always did, back straight, hands folded, pretending not to notice how everyone else leaned inward toward one another. My wife had cooked too much food as usual, the way she always did when she was nervous. Roast chicken drying under foil. Potatoes going cold. A cake from the grocery store with icing so sweet it made my teeth ache just looking at it. I told myself it was fine. I told myself that quiet was normal. That this careful politeness, this emotional buffering, was what adulthood looked like after enough years had worn the edges off you. Then my stepdaughter slid the box across the table. "Happy birthday," she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. The box was small. Matte black. Headphones. I stared at it longer than necessary, buying time, the way I always did when emotions started edging too close. I smiled. I nodded. I did all the right things. "You didn't have to get me anything," I said. It was a lie. I had learned a long time ago that gratitude was easier to perform than need. She watched me carefully as I picked it up, like she was waiting to see if I'd drop it. "They're noise canceling," she added. That was it. No smile. No joke. Just that sentence, placed between us like a weight. Noise canceling. "Wow," I said. "These are nice." I peeled the plastic off slowly, aware of the way the room had gone quiet. The seal was already broken. Just a little. Enough that I noticed. Enough that my stomach tightened, though I didn't yet know why. "Promise you'll actually use them," she said. There it was again. That strange intensity. Not anger. Not fear. Something closer to hope mixed with dread. "I will," I said. "Thank you." She nodded once and leaned back in her chair, arms folding across her chest. Conversation resumed, but something had shifted. I could feel it the way you feel pressure change before a storm. I had been in her life since she was 13. Long enough to matter. Long enough to fail. I told myself I had done my best. Provided. Stayed consistent. Never raised my voice. Never crossed a line. I was the stable one. The man who didn't disappear. But stability isn't the same as presence. And I think, on some level, she had always known that. Later that night, after the dishes were stacked and the house settled into its familiar hum, I sat alone on the edge of the bed with the box in my lap. My wife was already asleep, turned away from me, the way we'd learned to sleep after years of unspoken compromises. I turned the headphones over in my hands. They were heavier than I expected. I almost put them back in the box. That was my instinct. Leave things untouched. Preserve the surface. Don't invite questions you aren't prepared to answer. Instead, I plugged them in. The moment they settled over my ears, the room disappeared. Not the gentle quiet I'd expected, not the soft hush of technology doing its job, but something deeper. Thicker. Like the world had been wrapped in cotton and lowered 6 feet underground. I exhaled. It felt good. Too good. I sat there longer than I meant to, letting the silence press in around me. For the first time in years, there was nothing to respond to. No one needed me. No one was disappointed. No one was waiting for me to say the wrong thing. I took them off quickly, unsettled by how much relief I'd felt. That should have been my first warning. The next morning, I wore them to work. It wasn't a conscious decision. Just habit. Slip them on, drown out the open office chatter, the constant low-grade tension of phones ringing and keyboards clacking and people pretending they weren't exhausted. I had built my career on being unobtrusive. Reliable. The guy who didn't make waves. The guy who stayed late without being asked and left without being noticed. The headphones fit perfectly. I was halfway through my first email when I heard it. A voice. Not from my desk. Not from behind me. Inside the silence. At first, I thought it was interference. A glitch. Some residual noise bleeding through the cancellation. I frowned and adjusted the settings. The voice came again. Clearer this time. I froze. Someone was speaking and it wasn't coming from the room. My heart started to pound, the sound of it loud in my ears despite the technology wrapped around them. I slid the headphones off slowly. The office noise rushed back in. Laughter. Phones. The mundane comfort of reality. I stared at the headphones on my desk. You're tired, I told myself. You didn't sleep well. It's nothing. I put them back on. The voice returned immediately. I couldn't make out the words yet, just the cadence. The unmistakable rhythm of conversation. Pauses. Press. Another voice answering. My mouth went dry. Hey. I nearly jumped out of my chair. Mark stood beside my desk, coffee in hand, mid-sentence. Then he noticed the headphones. He stopped. Not hesitated. Stopped. His eyes locked onto them, and all the color drained from his face. Where did you get those? He asked. Something in his tone made my stomach drop. I said, pulling one ear cup away. They were a gift. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. You need to take those off, he said. Right now. I laughed weakly. What? Why? He didn't smile. Take them to the police, he whispered. Today. The word hung between us like a threat. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline that never came. I'm serious, he said. You don't want those. He straightened up and walked away without another word. I sat there for a long time after that, staring at the headphones. I didn't ask him why. That part came easily. I had spent a lifetime not asking. That afternoon, I put the headphones back on. And this time, when the voices started speaking, I listened. I didn't yet understand what I was hearing. Only that it wasn't meant for me. And that somehow, against all my careful instincts, it had found me anyway. The strangest part wasn't the fear. It was how quickly my mind tried to make excuses for it. By the time Mark walked away from my desk, his warning still ringing in my ears, I was already rearranging the facts into something safer. A glitch. A cross signal. Some new piece of technology one didn't understand because I was older now, slower, not built for how fast things moved anymore. People like me don't stumble into danger. We don't get dragged into stories. We stay on the edges and watch them happen to other people. So I stayed where I was. I answered emails. I nodded when someone spoke to me. I acted like my heart wasn't hammering against my ribs. The headphones sat on my desk, coiled neatly, waiting. They looked harmless. Obedient. At lunch, I picked them up without thinking. That's the lie I tell myself now, that it was unconscious. But the truth is quieter and worse. I wanted to know. Just enough to understand. Just enough to prove Mark was wrong. I ate in my car, parked at the far edge of the lot where no one would knock on the window and ask how I was doing. The sun baked the dashboard. Somewhere nearby, an engine turned over and died. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. I put the headphones on. The silence swallowed everything. Then the voices came back. Clear this time. Too clear. Two men. One older, calm in a way that suggested practice. The other younger, tighter, like every sentence cost him something. I could hear movement, chairs scraping, a hand tapping against a hard surface. The acoustics of a room that wasn't mine. Not the first time, the older man said. My breath caught. I ripped the headphones off and stared through the windshield, my reflection pale and unfamiliar in the glass. My hands shook, so I pressed them flat against my thighs and waited for the feeling to pass. You're imagining it, I told myself. Stress does this. Lack of sleep does this. But hallucinations don't wait their turn. They don't respond. I put the headphones back on. Said he'd handle it, the younger voice replied. They always say that, the older one answered. They rarely mean it. My stomach tightened. This wasn't interference. This wasn't a podcast bleeding through. This was live. Ongoing. I felt like I'd accidentally leaned against a wall and found a hidden door. I listened longer than I should have. That's the part that matters. They talked about schedules. About something that had gone wrong the night before. About fixing it so it wouldn't happen again. I didn't understand every word, but I understood the shape of it. The weight. This wasn't harmless. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I nearly jumped. A text from my wife. Can you grab milk on your way home? The ordinary cruelty of that moment almost broke me. Two worlds colliding. One asking for milk. the other whispering about things that felt sharp and illegal and real. I drove back to work with the radio blaring, desperate for noise. That night, I didn't tell anyone. Not my wife. Not my stepdaughter. Especially not my stepdaughter. She'd looked at me when she gave me those headphones like she was making a gamble. Like she was handing me something fragile and hoping I wouldn't drop it the way I had dropped so many things before. I told myself I was protecting her by staying quiet. I barely slept. The voices followed me into the dark. The older man's calm. The younger man's hesitation. I recognized that hesitation. I'd lived inside it for decades. The next morning, I wore the headphones again. This time, I didn't pretend it was an accident. The office felt exposed now, like the walls were thinner than they used to be. When people spoke, I caught myself watching their mouths, imagining their voices piped directly into my head. I put the headphones on at my desk. They were already talking. 3 days, the younger man said. That's all I'm asking. 3 days is generous, the older one replied. Don't confuse patience with mercy. My skin prickled. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling tiles, telling myself to take them off. To stand up. To walk somewhere, anywhere, that would absolve me of what I was hearing. Instead, I fixed a minor problem for a coworker. I answered another email. I stayed useful. That's how avoidance survives. You bury the big thing under small responsibilities and call it discipline. I didn't notice Mark behind me until he spoke. You're wearing them again. I slid one ear cup off. Don't, he said quietly. Just tell me you haven't heard anything. I hesitated. That was all the answer he needed. They don't belong to you, he said. Whatever this is, it's bigger than you think. Bigger. The word followed me home. That night, I stood in my kitchen with the milk sweating on the counter and the house silent around me. I thought about the man I'd been my whole life. The man who stayed out of trouble by staying out of everything. I put the headphones on one last time. The voices were there. And this time, the older man said my name. Not clearly. Not directly. But close enough that my breath stopped. I tore the headphones off and dropped them like they'd burned me. For the first time, I understood the truth I'd avoided for decades. Silence wasn't protecting me. It was making me complicit. I didn't go to the police the next morning. That's the truth, stripped clean of excuses. I woke up before my alarm, heart already racing, the house still dark and quiet. For a few seconds, I lay there staring at the ceiling, pretending the previous day had been a bad dream. But the weight was still in my chest, heavy and familiar now, like a second heart. The headphones sat on the dresser where I'd left them, black against the pale wood. I hadn't meant to put them there. I must have set them down without thinking, like you do with something important you're not ready to throw away. I showered. I shaved. I put on the same blue button-down I wore every Tuesday. Routine is a powerful sedative. At breakfast, my wife talked about a problem at work. Someone missing a deadline, someone else taking credit. I nodded at the right moments. I poured coffee. I didn't mention the way my hands trembled when I lifted the mug. She didn't notice. That wasn't an accusation. It was just the truth of us. Two people who had learned how to coexist without colliding. On the drive to work, I told myself I'd go to the police after lunch. Or after one more listen. Or after I understood enough to explain it clearly, calmly, without sounding like a man who had lost his grip on reality. That last part mattered more than it should have. I'd spent my whole life proving I was reasonable. Dependable. The kind of man whose word carried weight because it was never dramatic. Never emotional. Men like that don't burst into police stations talking about mysterious headphones and disembodied voices. Men like that wait. At my desk, I didn't put the headphones on right away. I answered emails. I checked the calendar. I handled small problems as they came, each one giving me a brief sense of control. Then, sometime mid-morning, I noticed the silence. Not the absence of sound, the absence of relief. I realized I was listening for the voices even without the headphones on. Leaning toward the quiet the way you lean toward a half-remembered song. That scared me more than anything I'd heard so far. I put the headphones on. The room disappeared. The voices were already there, as if they'd been waiting. He won't talk, the younger man said. His voice was thinner today, stretched tight. "You're assuming that," the older one replied. "People surprise you when the pressure's right." Pressure. The word lodged itself behind my ribs. As they spoke, something else crept in. Memories? Unrelated at first, or so I thought. Moments I hadn't touched in years, drifting up uninvited. My stepdaughter at 16, standing in the doorway with red-rimmed eyes, asking if she could stay at a friend's house for a few days. Me nodding, not asking why. Telling myself it was respect. Privacy. My wife, years earlier, sitting at the kitchen table long after dinner, staring at nothing. Me asking if she was tired instead of asking what was wrong. My father, silent at his own dinner table, drinking coffee that had long gone cold, teaching me without words that emotions were things you swallowed whole. I'd always thought I was choosing peace. Listening now, I wondered how many times I'd chosen cowardice and called it calm. The younger man hesitated again. What if he goes to the police? The older man chuckled softly. Most people don't. They tell themselves it's not their business. That it'll sort itself out. My mouth went dry. I knew that voice. Not the man, but the certainty. The confidence that people like me were predictable. That our silence could be counted on. I took the headphones off and pressed my palms against my eyes. I told myself I couldn't be sure this was real. That even now, even with the clarity of it, there was still room for doubt. That doubt was safer than action. Mark walked past my desk without stopping. He didn't look at me. That felt deliberate. At lunch, I didn't go to my car. I stayed inside, eating at my desk, afraid of what I might hear if I was alone again. The headphones stayed off. But their presence was louder than any sound. I checked my phone and saw a message from my stepdaughter. "Did you try them yet?" My thumb hovered over the screen. A dozen responses came to mind. Polite ones. Non-committal ones. Lies wrapped in reassurance. "Yeah, they're great. Thanks again. Really appreciate it." I typed nothing. The afternoon dragged. Every minute felt borrowed. By the time 5 o'clock came around, I felt hollowed out, scraped clean by the effort of pretending everything was normal. At home, my wife was already cooking. The smell of garlic and oil filled the kitchen. She glanced at me over her shoulder. "You okay?" she asked. The question was automatic. Habitual. "Just tired," I said. She nodded and turned back to the stove. I watched her for a moment longer than usual. The slope of her shoulders. The quiet competence. I wondered how many times she'd asked that question hoping for a different answer. After dinner, I stood alone in the living room with the headphones in my hands. The TV was off. The house felt too still. I thought about my stepdaughter's face when she'd given them to me. The way she'd said, "Promise you'll use them. Not enjoy them. Use them." I put the headphones on. The voices returned, immediate and intimate, like they'd never left. 3 days, the younger man said again. "That's not much time." "It's enough," the older one replied. "For someone who knows when to stay quiet." My heart hammered. I understood then that the danger wasn't just what I was hearing. It was what hearing it was doing to me. Stripping away the story I'd told myself about who I was. I wasn't an innocent bystander. I was an audience. And audiences have power whether they want it or not. I took the headphones off slowly and set them on the coffee table. For the first time since this had started, I didn't feel confused. I felt exposed. I knew why my stepdaughter had chosen me. Not because I was strong. Not because I was brave. Because I was safe. Because she believed, somehow, that even a quiet man could be pushed into doing the right thing. I wasn't sure she was right. But I knew this much: if I stayed silent now, it wouldn't be ignorance anymore. It would be a decision. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I could live with the man that choice would make me. I didn't plan to talk to her that night. I told myself I needed more time. More clarity. A better explanation than "something is wrong with the headphones you gave me." I told myself I was protecting her by staying quiet, the same lie I'd been feeding myself for years. But avoidance has a shelf life. She found me in the garage, sitting on a folding chair with the door half open, the smell of oil and dust hanging in the air. I hadn't turned on the light. I was holding the headphones in my lap like a confession I didn't know how to make. She stopped when she saw them. Not surprised. Not confused. Resigned. That fast? She asked. Her voice was calm, but there was tension under it, like a wire pulled too tight. I looked up at her. Really looked. She wasn't a teenager anymore. She hadn't been for a long time. But in moments like this, I saw echoes of the girl who learned early how to read rooms, how to measure adults by what they avoided. I need you to tell me something, I said. She leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. A familiar posture. Defensive but not closed. I figured you might, she said. I swallowed. Did you know there was something wrong with them? She didn't answer right away. That pause told me everything. I didn't know exactly, she said finally. Not at first. I just knew they weren't normal. My chest tightened. So you gave them to me anyway? Yes. The word landed between us without apology. Why? I asked. She laughed softly once. Not amused. Tired. Because if I kept them, I'd never sleep again. That hit harder than I expected. She stepped closer, lowering her voice even though no one else was around. I found out by accident. Same as you, I guess. I thought I was losing my mind. I pictured her alone somewhere, hearing those voices, trying to decide if she could trust her own perception. The thought made my stomach twist. Why didn't you go to the police? I asked. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and something sharp flashed in her eyes. Because I'm not you, she said. They wouldn't listen to me. Not the way they'd listen to you. I felt that like a slap. She wasn't wrong. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. All the defenses I'd spent decades perfecting suddenly felt thin, brittle. So you gave them to me, I said slowly. You handed me something dangerous and hoped I'd, what? Fix it? She shook her head. No. I handed them to you because you've spent my whole life telling me you'd protect us. The word us echoed. I didn't know what else to do, she continued. I couldn't keep pretending it wasn't real. And I knew if I asked you outright, you'd tell me it was nothing. That I was overreacting. That hurt because it was true. So I gave you the headphones, she said. And I waited. For what? For you to finally listen. Silence filled the garage, thick and heavy. I thought about all the times she'd needed something from me and I'd offered neutrality instead. Advice without action. Presence without engagement. I'd called it being reasonable. She'd experienced it as abandonment. I heard things, I said quietly. She nodded. I know. Things that could hurt people. Another nod. Smaller this time. I was hoping you wouldn't say that, she admitted. But I figured you would. I rubbed my face with both hands, suddenly exhausted. Why me? I asked again. Why not someone else? She hesitated, then said, because you're careful. Because you don't rush. Because you don't want attention. That doesn't sound like a strength right now. No, she agreed. But it means you'd take it seriously. It means you wouldn't turn it into a story about yourself. I almost laughed at that. She stepped closer, her voice dropping. I needed someone who wouldn't look away once they knew. There was the thing she was really giving me. Not headphones. Responsibility. I don't know what to do, I said. That admission felt like standing naked in front of her. I'd never said that to her before. Not like this. She didn't gloat. She didn't press. Neither did I, she said. But now you do know. And knowing changes things. I looked down at the headphones in my lap. They seemed smaller now. Less mysterious. More dangerous. I waited 3 days, I said. I kept telling myself I needed to be sure. Her jaw tightened. And I think I waited because not knowing felt safer. She exhaled slowly. Yeah. It usually does. We stood there for a long moment, two adults finally acknowledging the gap that had always existed between us. Not hostility. Not love. Avoidance. I don't want this to be on you, I said. She tilted her head. It already is. It always was. I just didn't want to carry it alone. That was the moment something shifted. Not courage. Not certainty. Ownership. I'll go to the police, I said. The words surprised me as they left my mouth. She studied my face, searching for hesitation. When? She asked. Soon, I said. I need to do it right. She nodded. Just don't do it never. After she left the garage, I stayed where I was, staring at the open door, the night air cool against my skin. I thought about the man I'd been for 56 years. The one who believed staying out of trouble was the same as being good. I realized then that goodness wasn't passive. It demanded something. Inside the house, my wife laughed at something on television. Ordinary life, continuing on schedule. I picked up the headphones and felt their weight again, heavier now not because of what they carried, but because of what they asked. 3 days, the voice had said. I didn't know how much time I had left. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't about the headphones anymore. It was about whether I would finally become the man my stepdaughter had believed I could be. The waiting changed everything. Once I told her I would go to the police, soon, that cowardly word, I lost the luxury of ignorance. The world sharpened. Every sound felt intentional. Every quiet moment felt like a countdown. 3 days. That was the number that followed me everywhere. It wasn't written anywhere. No calendar reminder. No alarm. Just a low, persistent thrum in my chest, like a clock I couldn't see but couldn't escape. I didn't wear the headphones the next morning. I told myself that was restraint. Responsibility. A way of creating distance until I could do the right thing the right way. What it really was fear. At work, I caught myself scanning faces, wondering who knew something I didn't. Who might be connected. Who might already be watching me. I'd never been a paranoid man. I believed in systems. In order. In the idea that bad things happened elsewhere, to people who made messes. Now I wasn't so sure. Mark avoided me completely. Not out of cruelty. Out of self-preservation. I recognized it because I'd perfected the same maneuver over decades. Step back, don't engage, let the problem drift out of your orbit. At lunch, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I stared at it until the screen went dark. That night, I dreamed of voices bleeding through walls. Of doors I couldn't close. I woke up sweating, my heart racing, convinced I could hear someone breathing just outside the bedroom. My wife slept through it. She always had. The second day, I put the headphones in my briefcase. Not on my head. Not yet. Just close enough to remind myself they were real. All day, my thoughts circled the same questions. What if I misunderstood? What if I make this worse? What if going to the police pulls my family into something that never touches us if I stay quiet? Those questions were seductive. They wore the mask of responsibility. But underneath, they all asked the same thing. What if you do nothing and nothing happens to you? That afternoon, I caught my reflection in the office bathroom mirror. The man staring back at me looked older than he had a week ago. Not frail. Just thinner. Like something essential had been stripped away. I thought about my stepdaughter at 16 again, standing in that doorway, eyes red, asking for a few days away. I remembered how relieved I'd been when she didn't explain. How grateful I'd felt not to be pulled into the mess. I had mistaken relief for virtue. When I got home, the house was empty. My wife was late. The quiet pressed in, thick and heavy. I took the headphones out of the briefcase and set them on the kitchen table. I stood there for a long time without touching them. Then I put them on. The voices were already there. He's hesitating, the younger man said. My breath caught. Everyone hesitates, the older one replied. That's the space where you learn what they're made of. I felt exposed, like a light had been turned on inside me. They talked about contingency plans. About loose ends. About timing. I couldn't hear everything clearly, but the shape of it was unmistakable now. This wasn't just talk. It was preparation. My phone buzzed again. The same unknown number. This time, I answered. No one spoke. I listened to the faint hiss on the other end, my pulse pounding in my ears. Then the line went dead. I stood there shaking, the voices still murmuring through the headphones, and finally admitted what I'd been refusing to say out loud. This had crossed a line. Not just legally. Morally. Personally. I took the headphones off and set them down with care, like they might shatter if I moved too fast. I sat at the table and pressed my palms flat against the surface, grounding myself in something solid. I thought about my wife. About how she trusted the quiet I brought into her life. How my steadiness had become the scaffolding of our marriage, even if it had also become the wall between us. I thought about my stepdaughter, about the gamble she'd made handing me that box. She hadn't asked me to be brave. She'd asked me to be present. That night, I didn't sleep. On the third day, I woke up with a strange calm. Not peace. Clarity. I wore the headphones to work one last time. Not to listen longer than necessary. Not to satisfy curiosity. But to know, without doubt, that I wasn't imagining any of it. I sat at my desk and put them on. If he talks, the younger man said, voice strained, it all unravels. There was a pause. Then the older man spoke, quieter now. Most men like him don't. My chest tightened. Men like him. Men like me. Men who believed silence was neutrality. Men who mistook passivity for decency. I took the headphones off. I didn't wait for more. At noon, I walked out of the office without telling anyone where I was going. I drove past the familiar turns, past the routines that had defined my life, and parked 2 blocks away from the police station. I sat in the car with my hands on the steering wheel, heart pounding, the building looming ahead of me. This was the moment avoidance had been training me for my entire life. I could still leave. I could still go home and tell myself I'd tried. My phone buzzed again. A known number. I didn't answer. I got out of the car. Inside, the air smelled like disinfectant and old paper. A uniformed officer looked up from the desk. "Can I help you?" he asked. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. For a moment, I saw myself at 56 years of restraint and self-editing and emotional distance crystallized into this one instant. I saw all the times I'd chosen quiet over courage. Then I thought of my stepdaughter's voice in the garage. "Just don't do it, never." "I need to report something," I said. My voice shook. But it didn't disappear. The officer nodded and gestured for me to sit. As I lowered myself into the chair, I felt the weight of the last 3 days settle into something solid and irreversible. Whatever happened next, whatever damage or fallout or fear, it would no longer be shaped by silence. For the first time in my life, I had chosen to be heard. I thought going to the police would feel like an ending. Like once the words were out of my mouth, once the responsibility was transferred across a desk to someone with a badge and a gun and a system behind them, the weight would lift. I'd done my part. I could go back to being the man who slept through the night. That wasn't how it worked. It started with a phone call. I was at work when it came in. Late morning, the kind of hour where nothing dramatic is supposed to happen. My desk phone rang. Not my cell. The office line. That alone made my stomach tighten. "Can I speak with you privately?" the voice asked. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't rushed. It was professional in a way that left no room for misunderstanding. I stood up without answering anyone's questions and followed the voice into a small conference room that smelled faintly of dry erase markers and burnt coffee. The door clicked shut behind me. "This is Detective Harris," he said. "You came in yesterday." I nodded. My throat felt tight. "We need to ask you some follow-up questions," he continued. "And before we do, there's something you should know." I braced myself. "You weren't the first call we made," he said. "You were the last." That landed harder than I expected. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," he said carefully, "that we already knew about the device. We just didn't know who had it." The room felt smaller. "We believe," he went on, "that it was passed to you intentionally." I thought of my stepdaughter's face in the garage. Not desperate. Determined. "Is she?" I started. "She's not in trouble," he said quickly. "But she may have saved lives." I closed my eyes. For years, I'd thought of myself as the quiet one. The stabilizing presence. The man who absorbed risk by refusing to engage with it. Now I was being told that my silence had almost cost something real. And that her courage had been louder than mine. "We need everything you heard," Harris said. "Every detail. Even the things you're not sure about." "I waited," I said. The words came out before I could stop them. I didn't come in right away. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Most people do," he said. What matters is that you're here now. I didn't know whether to believe that. The interview took hours. Voices replayed. Timelines reconstructed. I spoke until my mouth went dry, until the weight in my chest shifted from panic to something like resolve. Each sentence felt like peeling back another layer of skin, exposing parts of myself I'd spent decades protecting. When I got home that night, my wife was waiting in the living room. Not watching TV. Not distracted. Waiting. "Why did the police call here?" she asked. I sat down across from her, the space between us suddenly charged. "I need to tell you something," I said. She listened without interrupting as I explained. The headphones. The voices. The 3 days. The police station. When I finished, she exhaled slowly and leaned back. "I always wondered," she said quietly. "Wondered what?" "What would finally make you speak up?" That hurt more than any accusation could have. I wanted to explain myself. To talk about fear. About responsibility. About how silence had felt safer than action. Instead I said, "I'm sorry." She nodded once. "I know." That night, for the first time in years, we talked without skirting the edges. About her frustration. About my withdrawal. About the way we'd both mistaken peace for distance. It didn't fix everything, but it cracked something open. Later, lying in bed, my phone buzzed. A known number. I didn't answer. A voicemail appeared instead. No voice. Just breathing. Slow. Deliberate. The fear that washed over me then was sharp and immediate. This wasn't abstract anymore. This wasn't just voices through headphones. This was real. The next morning, Detective Harris called again. "We believe they know the device is compromised," he said. "Which means they may try to recover it. Or eliminate loose ends." "Loose ends?" I repeated. "Oh," he said. "Potentially." I sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of that word pressing down on me. "What do I do?" I asked. "For now," he said, "you keep doing exactly what you've been doing. You answer when we call. You don't change your routine unless we tell you to." Normalcy as camouflage. That had always been my strength. After the call, I sat there for a long time, staring at my hands. Hands that had built a life on restraint. On staying in bounds. On never being the reason things escalated. I thought about how close I'd come to staying silent. To letting the story move forward without me. I understood now why the voices had unsettled me so deeply. They weren't just criminal. They were confident. Confident that men like me would never disrupt the flow. I stood up and went into the kitchen, where my stepdaughter was making coffee. She looked up, searching my face. "They called?" I said. She nodded. "I figured they would. They said you might have saved lives." She shrugged, but her eyes shone. "I just needed you to do something." "I know," I said, "and I will. Whatever comes next." That was the moment it became real. Not the police station, not the interviews, not the fear. The promise. Because for the first time, it wasn't made in silence. It was made out loud. I always thought confrontation would feel explosive. Raised voices. Accusations. Doors slamming. The kind of moment you can't take back once it's done. Instead, it arrived quietly. The police interview was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, early enough that the building still smelled like cleaning solution and stale coffee. Detective Harris met me at the door and led me into a room with no windows and a table that had seen better years. A recorder sat between us, its small red light already glowing. "This is the part where you tell the story from the beginning," he said. "Not the technical version. Your version." I nodded. When I started speaking, my voice surprised me. It didn't shake. It didn't rush. It moved carefully, like a man stepping across thin ice but no longer pretending the lake wasn't there. I told him about the birthday. The box. The hesitation in my stepdaughter's hands. I told him about Mark's warning, about the voices, about the 3 days I spent convincing myself silence was responsibility. I didn't try to make myself look better. That was new. At one point, Harris stopped me. "Why didn't you come in right away?" The old answer was right there, ready to deploy. I needed to be sure. I didn't want to overreact. I let it pass. Because staying quiet has always worked for me, I said. Until it didn't. He nodded once and let me continue. When the recorder finally clicked off, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief. Release. Later that day, my wife asked to walk with me after dinner. We circled the neighborhood slowly, the sky darkening above us. For years, our walks had been practical, health-focused, efficient. This one wasn't. You scared me, she said. I know. You always disappear when things get hard, she continued. You don't leave. You just retreat. I stopped walking. I thought I was keeping us safe, I said. I thought if I stayed steady, nothing would break. She looked at me, really looked. Things still broke, she said softly. We just learned how to live around the cracks. The truth of that settled between us. I don't want to do that anymore, I said. I don't want to live quietly next to problems and call it peace. She reached for my hand. I don't need you to be loud, she said. I just need you to be present. That night, my stepdaughter sat with me at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed. No agenda. No crisis. Just two adults sharing the same silence without hiding in it. I didn't think you'd do it, she admitted. Why? I asked. She shrugged. Because you never had before. That stung. But it was honest. I'm sorry, I said. She nodded. I know. That's why this mattered. The next morning, everything changed. Detective Harris called before sunrise. They're moving faster than we expected, he said. We believe there's going to be a handoff tonight. My pulse spiked. What does that mean? It means your testimony just became critical, he said. And it means there's risk. I thought about the younger voice. The hesitation. The countdown. What do you need from me? I asked. To come in. In person. And to keep your phone on. I didn't hesitate. At the station, they walked me through what would happen next. What I could expect. What I shouldn't do. For the first time in my life, I was part of something that required courage instead of compliance. Hours passed. Then more. When the arrest finally came through, it wasn't dramatic. No sirens. No cheers. Just a quiet confirmation from Harris. They're in custody, he said. It's over. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. All that waiting. All that silence. And this was what it ended with. Later, at home, my wife hugged me in the kitchen. Not out of habit. Out of relief. My stepdaughter stood nearby, watching. I'm proud of you, she said. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because I'd earned them, but because I hadn't known how much I wanted to. That night, lying in bed, I realized something simple and terrifying. Speaking up hadn't destroyed my life. It had revealed it. I wasn't the man who stayed quiet anymore. I was the man who finally spoke. And nothing about me felt smaller for it. The morning after the arrest, the house felt different. Not quieter. Not calmer. Just lighter. As if the walls had been holding their breath for weeks and could finally exhale. I walked through the kitchen, the smell of toast and coffee filling the space, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel like I was carrying someone else's danger inside me. My stepdaughter was at the counter, pouring herself a glass of orange juice. She looked up at me and smiled, the kind of smile that carries both relief and mischief. You did it, she said simply. I nodded. Words felt unnecessary. The 3 days, the tension, the fear, the hesitation, they had all built to this quiet acknowledgement. Sitting down at the table, I let the weight of everything settle, in a way that wasn't suffocating. I thought about the voices, about the younger man who hesitated, the older man who planned, the invisible consequences I'd almost ignored. And I realized how close I'd come to being the man who let life happen around him, silent and uninvolved. I wasn't that man anymore. Later, my wife came into the kitchen and set a hand on my shoulder. You look different, she said, careful, almost testing the ground. I feel different, I admitted. Not braver. Not stronger. Just awake. We stood in silence for a moment. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but full of understanding. She smiled faintly. I've been waiting for this version of you. I laughed quietly because it was true. Waiting had been a constant in our marriage, waiting for me to step into myself, to confront fear instead of sidestepping it, to speak instead of pretending neutrality was enough. That afternoon, I returned to the garage. The headphones sat where I'd left them, innocent now, like props from a story that had almost claimed me. I picked them up, weighing them in my hands. They weren't dangerous anymore, not by themselves. Their weight had always been about responsibility, about choice, about the courage to act when it mattered. I remembered the first moment my stepdaughter had handed them to me. Her eyes had dared me to rise to the occasion. Her trust had been quiet, but unwavering. And I had, finally, honored it. I put the headphones down gently and walked back inside. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of clarity that had nothing to do with avoiding risk and everything to do with facing it. Even later, lying in bed, I felt the truth settle in me, that life doesn't hand out safety in exchange for silence. That bravery isn't loud, it's deliberate. It's showing up even when it's inconvenient, frightening, or unknown. I thought about the next day, the weeks ahead, the conversations I would have to continue having with my family, the trust one had to rebuild, the patterns I had to change. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. I had been given an extraordinary gift. Not headphones, not knowledge, not fear, but the chance to finally step into the man I could be. I closed my eyes, letting the quiet fill the room, not empty, but alive. The kind of quiet that comes after storm and action. And I knew, finally, that silence no longer had power over me. I was awake. I was present. I was, at last, fully myself.